What if I told you that you can trade off inflation with the unemployment? Hello everyone, this is Shadhin and welcome to my YouTube video. In this video, I will be discussing inflation unemployment trade-off, Phillips Curve, short-run Phillips Curve and long-run Phillips Curve, relation between short-run Phillips Curve and long-run Phillips Curve. Our first topic is inflation unemployment trade-off. To understand this topic, at first we have to know what does the word inflation means. Inflation is the rate of change in the price level. So what does the word unemployment means? Unemployment is the situation in which people are looking for jobs but not getting. And trade-off means the act of giving up something for another thing. Now, we will be discussing about the relationship between inflation and unemployment. To understand that, we have to know about Phillips Curve. So what is a Phillips Curve? In studying the relationship between the rate of unemployment and inflation, A.W. Phillips found that a low rate of unemployment was associated with a high rate of inflation, whereas a high rate of unemployment was associated with a low rate of inflation. Now, we will discuss it graphically and elaborately. Suppose the inflation is at this point and the unemployment is at this point. If we increase the unemployment gradually, we can observe that the inflation is decreasing dramatically. From the curve, we can observe that there is an inverse relationship. The core idea is that when unemployment is low, the labor market is tight, forcing employers to offer higher wages, which in turn fuels inflation. Conversely, high unemployment can weaken wage pressures and decrease inflation. Now we'll talk about short-run Phillips curve or SRPS. This is a downward sloping curve showing the short-term trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Whereas in long-run Phillips curve or LRPS, we can observe that workers' inflation expectations adjust and the curve becomes vertical at the natural rate of unemployment, meaning there is no permanent trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Actually, in the long-run Phillips curve, there is no NAIRU. The long-run Phillips curve is without NAIRU. But if there is NAIRU, what would be it look like? So firstly, we have to talk about NAIRU. So what is NAIRU? So NAIRU is basically an acronym for non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, which is the lowest level of unemployment an economy can sustain without causing the rate of inflation to rise. Below NAIRU, efforts to reduce unemployment increases inflation, while unemployment above it can lead to stable or falling inflation. The NAIRU is a theoretical concept, not a directly observable figure, and it serves as a guide for policymakers, particularly central banks. In the long-run Phillips curve, we can see there is no fluctuation, no curves, it's just a straight line which is parallel to the y-axis. So, with NAIRU, our long-run Phillips curve will be a straight line. Now we will discuss about the price level versus real GDP or GDP curve and the Phillips curve, that is inflation versus unemployment. unemployment curve. So we know the Phillips curve looks like this, and in case of price level and GDP, we know there is two things. One is aggregated demand and another is aggregated supply. So we know the demand curve is always downward sloping like this. This is aggregated demand and this will be our aggregated supply. So we know when the government wants to increase the GDP, the aggregated demand curve just shifts right. So if the aggregated demand curve shifts right, it shifted right, that means the GDP has increased. Suppose it was Y1 before the shifting and now it's Y2. So definitely the price level will also increase. Suppose it was P1 and the final will be P2. So as the GDP increased, then definitely the unemployment will decrease. So let us assume when the price level was P1 and the GDP was Y1, then the unemployment was on this point. This is pi 1 and this is U1. So when the aggregated demand curve shifted, then the inflation also increased, but the unemployment has reduced. So this is called demand pool. This is called demand pool. So through demand pool we can observe that the unemployment will be reduced but the inflation will increase. So let's consider another curve, another two curves actually, price and again inflation unemployment. So as usual the inflation versus unemployment curve will look like this, and GDP and price level curve will look like this. This is aggregated demand and this is aggregated supply. Now if the curve of aggregated supply will change, that is it will shift upward like this way. In that case we can observe that the GDP will be decreased. Okay, and from the previous curve we have observed that the price level has increased. In this curve the price level will also increase. So we can say that in the both cases there will be an inflation, a rise in inflation. This is pi 1, this is pi 2. But initially let us consider the initially the unemployment was this, and finally from the change of aggregate supply curve we can say that as the GDP decreased, then the employment must decrease. So the unemployment should increase. But if we join this, we get the unemployment reduced, which is not possible. So the whole curve, that is the whole Phillips curve, will shift rightward. And this point will be shifted over here. And this will be our new unemployment. But the inflation level will be same. Okay. So this is called cost push. So from this we can understand that because of the cost push, the unemployment rate will increase. Okay. and because of the demand pool, the unemployment rate will be decreased. So this is for short run Phillips curve. So now we'll consider the demand pool and cost push for the long run Phillips curve. GDP versus, that is GDP and price level curve. We know it was our aggregated demand and this is our aggregated supply. In that case, because of the shift of the aggregated demand, the GDP increased and the employment also increased. As the employment increased, the unemployment decreased. So it will shift over here. So let us consider this is pi 1 and this would be pi 2. Okay. So the inflation will increase, but the unemployment will be decreased. Again, when so this happens because of the demand pool. And for the cost push, if we draw the curve for cost push, this price level, this is the aggregated demand and this is aggregated supply. For cost push, the supply curve will shift upward. In that case, the GDP will decrease, but the price level will increase in the same way as previously it has. So in that case, the inflation will increase in the same way, but if we consider this point here, then it will be false, because if GDP decrease, then there will be no chance of decreasing the unemployment. So definitely the unemployment increase. In that case, this point will shift here in this point. So the net unemployment will remain same and we'll get a straight line. So this is the relationship between long run Phillips curve and short run Phillips curve. Just like we wrapped up today's topic, I'm wrapping up this video with a huge thank you to you, and do not forget to like, share and comment.